The blood in Zachary Ellsworth's veins turned to ice water when he heard the soft breathing coming from beneath the canvas cover of his wagon bed. A sound that didn't belong in the howling Colorado blizzard of January 1878. He'd been making his way back from Denver to Moab, Utah. A journey he'd made countless times hauling supplies and trading goods across the harsh winter territories. The snow had started falling 3 hours past, thick and relentless, turning the world into a white nightmare. He'd stopped to check on his 2 mules, making sure they were secured properly for the night when he heard it. Someone was in his wagon. His hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip, but something made him pause. The breathing was too soft, too delicate. Not the heavy snores of a drifter or outlaw looking to rob him blind. This was different. Zachary pulled back the canvas flap slowly, his other hand holding a lantern high. The golden light spilled across a sight that made his breath catch in his throat. A woman lay curled in the corner of his wagon bed, wedged between 2 crates of dried goods. Her dark hair was matted with snow and ice, her lips tinged blue from the cold. She wore a thin cotton dress that was completely inadequate for the weather, torn at the hem and stained with dirt and what looked like dried blood. Her feet were bare, the skin an alarming shade of purple. For a moment, Zachary just stared, his mind racing through possibilities. A runaway. Someone left for dead. He'd seen enough cruelty in his 32 years to know that women sometimes ended up in terrible situations through no fault of their own. He set the lantern down carefully and reached out, his calloused hand gentle as he touched her shoulder. She was ice cold through the thin fabric. "Miss," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Miss, wake up." She didn't respond. Zachary's heart hammered against his ribs. He shook her a little harder, fear starting to creep in. Had he found her too late? Then her eyelids fluttered. Dark lashes opened to reveal eyes the color of warm honey, confused and unfocused. She stared at him for a long moment, and then her body went rigid with fear. She tried to scramble backward, but there was nowhere to go in the confined space. "Easy, easy," Zachary said, holding up both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you. This is my wagon you're in. What happened to you?" The woman's eyes darted around, taking in her surroundings, then back to him. Her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. I'm sorry, I didn't. I was just so cold. How long have you been out here?" Zachary asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. I don't know. Days, maybe." Her voice was barely a whisper, weak and trembling. Zachary made a decision in that instant. He could see she was on the edge of freezing to death, and whatever had brought her to crawl into his wagon in the middle of a Colorado blizzard, she needed help immediately. "We need to get you warm. Can you move?" She tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back down, her body too weak from cold and exhaustion. Zachary didn't hesitate. He climbed into the wagon, wrapping his heavy wool coat around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame completely. "My cabin isn't far," he said, though that wasn't entirely true. "In this weather, the 1.5 miles might as well be 10. But we can't travel until the storm breaks. I'm going to get more blankets. Don't move." He retrieved every blanket he owned from his supplies, along with his bedroll. When he returned to the wagon, the woman was exactly where he'd left her, her body shaking violently with shivers. Zachary wrapped blanket after blanket around her, tucking them tightly. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep her conscious. "Zara," she managed through chattering teeth. "Zara Evans." "Well, Miss Evans, I'm Zachary Ellsworth, but most folks call me Zach. You picked a hell of a night to be out in a Colorado blizzard." A sound that might have been a laugh escaped her lips, but it turned into a cough. Didn't exactly plan it." Zachary studied her face in the lantern light. She was young, probably around 25 or 26, with delicate features and skin that spoke of someone who'd once been well cared for. The contrast between that and her current state made his jaw tighten with anger at whoever had left her in this condition. "Can you tell me what happened?" Zara's eyes filled with tears. "My husband, he wasn't a good man. We were traveling from Missouri to California. He got mean when he drank, and he drank a lot on the trail. 3 days ago we had a fight. He hit me harder than usual and I fought back. Knocked him down. I ran. Just ran into the snow without thinking. I thought I could make it to the next town, but I got lost. Everything looked the same. When I saw your wagon, I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." Zachary felt his hands ball into fists. He'd seen plenty of men who thought hitting women made them tough. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "And your husband, is he looking for you?" Zara shook her head slightly. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe he just kept going. He told me once that I was more trouble than I was worth." "Well, he's a goddamn fool then," Zachary said, the words out before he could stop them. He cleared his throat, feeling heat rise to his face despite the cold. "I mean, no man should treat his wife that way, or any woman." For the first time, something like a smile touched Zara's lips. "Thank you." The wind howled outside, shaking the wagon. Zachary knew they weren't going anywhere tonight. He'd have to make the best shelter he could right here and hope the storm passed by morning. "I'm going to set up a better windbreak," he told Zara, "and get a fire going if I can manage it. You stay wrapped up tight in those blankets, you hear me?" She nodded, already looking drowsy. Zachary recognized the signs of hypothermia. He needed to get her warmer and fast. He worked quickly in the blinding snow, using the wagon as one wall and constructing a rough lean-to with canvas and whatever wood he could find. It wasn't much, but it would provide some protection from the wind. Getting a fire started was harder, but Zachary was nothing if not stubborn. He'd learned to survive in these mountains, and he wasn't about to let them claim this woman's life. Finally, blessed flames caught and held. He built up the fire carefully, then returned to the wagon. Zara's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "Miss Evans," he said, shaking her gently. "Zara, you need to stay awake." Her eyes opened slowly. "So tired." "I know, but you need to fight it a little longer. Can you move at all?" With Zachary's help, Zara managed to shift to the edge of the wagon. He lifted her as carefully as he could, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms. When was the last time she'd eaten a proper meal? He carried her to the fire, settling her on his bedroll and piling the blankets around her again. Then he did something he knew was necessary, but also knew could be misconstrued. He began to rub her hands and feet gently, trying to restore circulation. "What are you doing?" Zara asked, her voice alarmed. "You've got frostbite starting," Zachary explained, keeping his voice calm and professional. "We need to warm your extremities slowly. I promise you, Miss Evans, I'm only trying to help. You have my word as a gentleman." Zara studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you." They sat in silence for a while, just the crackling of the fire and the howling wind for company. Zachary worked methodically, warming her hands first, then carefully, respectfully, working on her feet. The skin was dangerously cold, but he thought she'd gotten inside in time. She might lose a toe or two in the worst case, but hopefully not. "Tell me about yourself," Zara said suddenly. "It will help keep me awake." Zachary glanced up at her, surprised. "Not much to tell. I've been running supplies between Denver and Moab for about 8 years now. Before that, I worked as a ranch hand, did some cattle driving. Lost my parents to cholera when I was 19, been on my own since." "No wife." "No family." "No wife," Zachary confirmed. "Came close once, but she decided she wanted a man with more settled prospects. Can't say I blamed her. This is a hard life." "But you like it," Zara said. It wasn't a question. Zachary considered that. "I like the freedom of it, like being my own man, answering to nobody but myself. Though I suppose that sounds selfish." "It sounds honest," Zara replied. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I haven't felt free in a long time." The weight of those words settled between them. Zachary wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about how she'd ended up married to a man who'd hurt her, how she'd survived 3 days in the snow with nothing. But he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she was fighting to stay conscious. "You should eat something," he said, moving to his supplies. He found some jerky and hardtack, not much, but it would help. He also had a small pot he used for coffee. He filled it with snow and set it near the fire to melt. Zara tried to eat, but her hands were shaking too badly. Without thinking, Zachary moved closer and helped her, tearing the jerky into small pieces she could manage. There was something intimate about the act, something that made his heart beat a little faster. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Zara asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I could be lying. I could be dangerous." Zachary smiled slightly. "You're about as dangerous as a half-frozen kitten right now, Miss Evans. And as for why, well, I was raised to help people when they need it. My mama would have tanned my hide if I'd left a woman to freeze to death when I could have done something about it. Your mother sounds like she was a good woman." "The best," Zachary agreed. "She was tough as nails but had the biggest heart you ever saw. Took in every stray animal, every person down on their luck. My father used to joke that our house had a revolving door." He paused, lost in memory for a moment. "She would have liked you." "You don't know that," Zara said, but there was a touch of warmth in her voice. "Sure I do." She had a soft spot for people with fight in them. "And lady, you've got fight. Walking 3 days in the snow in a cotton dress and bare feet. That's pure stubbornness keeping you alive." Zara laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound of it did something strange to Zachary's chest. He realized he wanted to hear that sound again, wanted to see her smile without the shadow of fear in her eyes. The water was warm enough to drink, and Zachary helped Zara sip it slowly. Color was starting to return to her face, though she still looked like a strong wind could blow her over. "You should sleep now," he said gently. "Real sleep. The storm should break by morning and then I can get you to my cabin. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." "Where will you sleep?" Zara asked. "I'll keep the fire going. Someone needs to anyway." "That's not fair, you'll freeze." Zachary shook his head. "I've slept in worse conditions. Besides, you need the warmth more than I do right now." Zara looked like she wanted to argue, but another wave of exhaustion washed over her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "You're welcome, Miss Evans. Now sleep." He watched as her eyes drifted closed, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of real sleep. She looked peaceful now, the lines of fear and pain smoothing from her face. Zachary found himself wondering what she'd looked like before whatever hardships had brought her here, what she'd been like when she smiled freely and often. He settled in for a long night, feeding the fire and listening to the storm rage around them. His mind kept circling back to the woman sleeping a few feet away. Zara Evans. A married woman, he reminded himself sternly, though from what she'd said, that marriage was troubled at best, violent at worst. But that wasn't his concern, was it? He'd help her get warm, get fed, maybe help her get to wherever she wanted to go next. That was the Christian thing to do, the right thing. Nothing more. Still, as the hours passed and he watched her sleep, Zachary couldn't deny the pull he felt. There was something about her, something beyond just wanting to help. It was like recognizing something in another person that matched something in yourself. A kindred spirit, his mother would have called it. The storm finally began to ease around dawn, the wind dying down to occasional gusts rather than the constant howl it had been. Zachary added more wood to the fire and checked on Zara. She was still sleeping soundly, her color much better than it had been the night before. He used the relative calm to tend to his mules, giving them feed and water, checking their hooves and legs. They were hardy animals, used to harsh conditions, but even they looked tired from the night's ordeal. When he returned to the fire, Zara was awake, sitting up and looking around with wide eyes. "Morning," Zachary said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Zara admitted, "and hungry, but alive thanks to you. Think you can travel? My cabin is about 1.5 miles from here." "I can carry you if you can't walk." Zara's cheeks flushed. "I can walk, I think, maybe with some help." Zachary helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow. She swayed a bit, and he could see pain cross her face when she put weight on her feet. The frostbite was going to hurt for a while. "We'll take it slow," he said. "No rush." It took them nearly 2 hours to cover what should have been a 40-minute walk. Zachary ended up carrying Zara the last quarter-mile when it became clear she simply couldn't go any further. She protested weakly, but he could tell she was relieved. His cabin came into view finally, a sturdy log structure nestled against a hillside with a stand of pine trees providing a windbreak. Smoke still rose from the chimney from the fire he'd banked before leaving for Denver. "It's not fancy," Zachary said as he kicked open the door, "but it's home." The cabin was indeed simple. One main room with a fireplace, a table and chairs, a stove for cooking, and a bed in one corner. There was a small loft above where Zachary stored supplies, and a door led to what looked like a small storage room. Zachary set Zara down gently on the bed, then moved to stoke the fire. Soon, warmth was spreading through the room, and he could see Zara visibly relax. "There's a water pump just outside," he said, "and an outhouse about 20 yards to the left. I'll get some proper food cooking. You must be starving." "I don't want to be any trouble," Zara started, but Zachary waved her off. "You're not trouble. Now rest while I cook." He made a simple stew from salt pork, dried beans, and the few vegetables he had left. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling. While it cooked, he found some of his cleaner clothes and set them on the bed next to Zara. "These will be too big," he said, "but they're clean and warm. There's a screen you can change behind. Take your time." Zara looked at the clothes, then at him, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Why are you doing all this? You don't even know me." Zachary met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I don't know your history, Miss Evans. But I know you're a woman in need of help, and I know I have the means to provide it. That's enough for me. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't need repayment. Just get well, that's payment enough." While Zara changed behind the screen, Zachary busied himself with the stew and tried not to think about the fact that there was a beautiful woman in his cabin, wearing his clothes, and he was going to have to figure out sleeping arrangements soon. When Zara emerged, she was swimming in his shirt and pants, the sleeves rolled up multiple times and the waist cinched with a piece of rope. But her face was brighter, and there was something almost like hope in her eyes. They ate together at his small table, and Zachary was gratified to see Zara eat 3 full bowls of stew. She'd been hungrier than she'd let on. "So what happens now?" Zara asked when they'd finished. "I mean, I can't stay here forever. You have a life, work to do." Zachary had been thinking about that very question. "Well, I figure you can stay here until you're fully recovered. No sense sending you back out before you're ready. After that, where do you want to go?" Zara was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. I don't have family anymore. They all died in a house fire when I was 17. That's how I ended up married to Robert. He was a friend of my uncle's, offered to take care of me. I thought I was lucky." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out being alone might have been better. You said you were heading to California." "We were." Robert had dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields, but I have no interest in California, not anymore. Honestly, I don't know where I want to go. I just know I can't go back to him." Zachary leaned back in his chair, studying her. An idea was forming in his mind, crazy and impulsive, but it felt right somehow. "What if you stayed here?" Zara's eyes widened. "What? Not forever," Zachary said quickly, though part of him whispered that forever might not be so bad. "Just for a while. Until you figure out what you want to do next. I could use help around here anyway. The place is a mess most of the time, and I'm not much of a cook. You could earn your keep that way if it would make you feel better about accepting help. But what would people think? A single man and a married woman living under the same roof. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away," Zachary pointed out. "And this is the frontier. People out here tend to mind their own business more than back east. Besides, you wouldn't really be living here, you'd be working as my housekeeper. There's a difference." Zara bit her lip, considering. "Are you sure? This is a lot to ask of a stranger." "You're not asking, I'm offering, and you won't be a stranger for long. Say yes, Zara, at least until spring. Give yourself time to heal and decide what comes next." He watched the play of emotions across her face, uncertainty, hope, fear, and finally, tentative acceptance. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you. Yes." The next few weeks fell into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Zachary continued his supply runs, though he made them shorter and more frequent so he wouldn't leave Zara alone for too long. When he was home, they worked together to maintain the cabin and prepare for the rest of winter. Zara proved to be an excellent cook, transforming his simple supplies into meals that made Zachary's mouth water. She cleaned and organized, mended his clothes, and generally brought a warmth to the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire. For her part, Zara seemed to bloom in the safety and peace of Zachary's home. The haunted look gradually faded from her eyes, replaced by something lighter. She laughed more, smiled more, and Zachary found himself doing everything he could to elicit those responses. They talked for hours by the fire at night, sharing stories of their pasts. Zara told him about growing up in Missouri, about her parents who'd been school teachers, about the books she'd loved to read. Zachary shared memories of his childhood, of learning to ride before he could properly walk, of the vast cattle drives he'd been part of as a young man. "Did you ever want more than this?" Zara asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "A wife, children, a bigger ranch maybe." Zachary poked at the fire with a stick, considering. "I used to. When I was younger, I thought I'd follow in my father's footsteps, build up a real operation. But after they died, I don't know. It felt like too much for one person. This life, moving around, trading, it suits me. Or at least it did." "Did?" Zara caught the past tense. Zachary met her eyes across the fire. "Things change. People change what they want." There was a weight to those words, a meaning that hung in the air between them. Zara looked away first, her cheeks flushing. It was becoming harder to ignore the growing feelings between them. Zachary found himself watching Zara when she wasn't looking, admiring the way lamplight caught in her hair, the grace of her movements as she worked. He thought about her first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And he was pretty sure, from the way he sometimes caught her looking at him, that she felt something too. But there was still the matter of her husband. Robert Evans was out there somewhere, and legally, Zara was still his wife. It was a barrier between them as real as any wall. One evening in late February, about 6 weeks after Zachary had found Zara in his wagon, the subject finally came up. They'd just finished dinner, and Zachary was helping Zara clean up, something that had become routine. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same dish, and the contact sent a jolt through him. From the sharp intake of Zara's breath, she'd felt it too. "Zara," Zachary said, his voice rough, "we need to talk about your situation." She set down the dish carefully. I know. You're still married in the eyes of the law. That man, Robert, he could show up here looking for you any day. I know, Zara repeated. I've been thinking about that, about what I should do. What do you want to do? Zara turned to face him fully. I want to be free of him, truly free. But I don't know how. Divorce is almost impossible to get, especially for a woman. And even if I could, I don't have money for a lawyer. Zachary had been thinking about this too, turning it over in his mind during his long supply runs. There might be another way. If we could prove he abandoned you, left you to die in the snow, that might be grounds. Or if he's moved on to California like he planned, and you haven't heard from him in months, there's desertion. You've been thinking about this, Zara said, something soft in her voice. Yes, Zachary admitted. I have. Why? He could have deflected, could have said something about just wanting to help, about Christian charity and frontier hospitality. But he was tired of pretending, tired of ignoring what had been building between them. Because I've fallen in love with you, Zachary said simply. And I want you to be free so that maybe, if you felt the same way, we could have a chance at something real. Zara's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Zach, you don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know you might not feel the same way, or you might not be ready even if you do. I just needed you to know. Of course I feel the same way, Zara said, her voice breaking. How could I not? You saved my life. You've been nothing but kind and gentle and good. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you wrapped me in blankets and promised you wouldn't hurt me. Zachary's heart felt like it might burst out of his chest. Really, really, Zara confirmed. She stepped closer to him, reaching up to touch his face gently. But you're right, it's complicated. I'm still legally bound to a man who might come looking for me. I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Let me worry about that, Zachary said, covering her hand with his. If Robert shows up, we'll deal with it. Together. But Zara, I need you to know I'm not asking you for anything you're not ready to give. We can take this as slow as you need. I just want to be with you in whatever way you're comfortable with. Zara leaned into him, and Zachary wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like she'd been made to fit against him just so. I want to be with you too, she whispered against his chest. I want that more than I've wanted anything in a long time. They stood like that for a long while, just holding each other. When Zara finally pulled back, Zachary cupped her face gently and leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. So what do we do now? Zara asked. Now, Zachary said, we figure out how to untangle you from that excuse for a marriage. And then, if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly. Do this the right way. I'd like that, Zara said. I'd like that very much. The next morning, Zachary rode into the nearest town, a small settlement called Bedrock, about 10 miles south. He spoke to the local magistrate, a gruff man named Judge Patterson who'd seen just about everything in his 40 years on the frontier. Zachary explained the situation carefully, leaving nothing out. Judge Patterson listened with a weathered face, nodding occasionally. So you want to know if she can get a divorce? The judge summarized when Zachary finished. Yes, sir, or an annulment if that's possible. Judge Patterson leaned back in his chair. Well, now, that's tricky. Colorado doesn't make divorce easy, especially for women. But there are provisions for cases of extreme cruelty and abandonment. If what you're telling me is true, and this Robert Evans left her in the snow to die, and she hasn't heard from him since, we might have a case. What would she need to do? She'd need to file a petition with the court, swear out an affidavit detailing the abuse and abandonment. We'd need to attempt to notify Evans of the proceedings, give him a chance to contest. If he doesn't show and your lady can prove her case, a judge could grant the divorce. How long would that take? Months at least, maybe longer, and it'll cost money for the legal fees. Zachary had expected that. I'll pay whatever it costs. Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. You're mighty sweet on this woman. I am, Zachary said simply. She's been through hell. She deserves a chance at her real life. You planning to marry her yourself if this divorce goes through? If she'll have me, yes, sir. The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, bring her in tomorrow. I'll help her file the paperwork. Can't make any promises, but we'll give it our best shot. Zachary rode back to the cabin feeling lighter than he had in weeks. When he told Zara what the judge had said, she threw her arms around him and cried tears of relief and joy. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you, thank you. Hey now, Zachary said, wiping her tears gently. We haven't won yet. This could take time. I don't care, Zara said fiercely. For the first time in years I have hope, real hope for a future. That's because of you. They rode to Bedrock together the next day. Judge Patterson was as good as his word, patiently helping Zara fill out all the necessary paperwork. She had to recount the details of her marriage, the abuse she'd suffered, and Zachary saw her hands shake as she wrote. He wanted to take that pain away from her, but he knew this was something she had to do herself. When it was done, the judge filed the petition with the territorial court and arranged for notices to be posted in newspapers across Colorado and into Missouri, where Robert was originally from. Now we wait, he told them. Could be 3 months, could be 6. Depends on if Evans contests and if we can prove service of the notice. As winter gave way to spring, Zachary and Zara settled into their new reality. They were officially courting now, though they were careful to maintain propriety. Zachary slept in the loft while Zara took the bed, and they were never alone in a way that would compromise her reputation, even though their nearest neighbor was miles away. But within those boundaries, their relationship deepened and grew. They took long walks as the snow melted, Zachary showing Zara the land he loved. They worked side by side in the garden, Zara planted behind the cabin, her hands in the soil bringing life from the earth. They read together in the evenings, sharing books and thoughts and dreams. Zachary had never been happier. Every day with Zara felt like a gift, like he'd been wandering in the desert and suddenly found an oasis. She was smart and funny, resilient and kind. She challenged him to think differently, to see the world through new eyes, and Zara bloomed under the attention and care. The thin, frightened woman he'd found in his wagon was gone, replaced by someone vibrant and full of life. She gained weight, her cheeks filling out and her body growing strong from good food and honest work. Her laugh came easily now, and Zachary made it his personal mission to hear that sound as often as possible. In April, Zachary had to make a longer supply run to Denver. He was gone for nearly 2 weeks, and when he returned, he found Zara had completely reorganized the cabin and surprised him with a new quilt she'd made from fabric he'd brought back from his last trip. I wanted to make the place more like a real home, she said shyly. I hope you don't mind. Mind? Zachary pulled her into his arms right there, kissing her soundly. Mind, Zara, this is wonderful, you're wonderful. That night after dinner, Zara grew serious. Zach, I need to tell you something. His heart clenched with sudden worry. What is it? I've been thinking about what happens if the divorce doesn't go through. If somehow Robert contests it, or the judge denies it, or something goes wrong. We'll figure it out, Zachary said firmly. We'll find another way. But what if there is no other way? What if I'm stuck married to him forever? Zara's voice was anguished. I couldn't bear it. Not now that I know what it's like to be truly cared for, to be loved. Zachary took her hands in his. Listen to me. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. If we have to wait, we'll wait. If we have to fight, we'll fight. But I'm not letting you go, Zara. Not unless you want to leave, and even then I'd probably follow you around like a lost puppy until you changed your mind. That got a watery laugh from her. I don't want to leave. Ever. Then stop worrying about things that haven't happened yet. We have today. We have right now. That's enough. May brought wildflowers blooming across the meadows and the first letter from Judge Patterson. Robert Evans had been located in California and served with notice of the divorce proceedings. He had 30 days to respond. Those 30 days were the longest of Zachary's life. Every day he checked with the judge, and every day there was no response from Robert. Finally, the deadline passed. He didn't contest, Judge Patterson told them, his grizzled face breaking into a rare smile. Didn't even acknowledge the notice. That works in our favor. I've scheduled a hearing for next month. If all goes well, you'll walk out of that courtroom a free woman, Miss Evans. The day of the hearing, Zachary dressed in his best clothes and waited while Zara got ready. When she emerged, he felt his breath catch. She wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself, her hair pinned up neatly. She looked beautiful and terrified in equal measure. "You're going to do great," Zachary assured her, offering his arm. "Just tell the truth." The hearing was held in a small courtroom in Denver. The judge, a stern-looking man named Horace Miller, listened carefully as Zara recounted her story. Zachary had to testify too, describing how he'd found her and the condition she'd been in. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Judge Miller rapped his gavel. "Based on the evidence presented and the failure of Robert Evans to appear or contest these proceedings, I find sufficient grounds for divorce based on extreme cruelty and willful abandonment. The marriage between Zara Evans and Robert Evans is hereby dissolved." Zara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Zachary wanted to shout, to cheer, but he maintained his composure until they were outside the courtroom. Then he swept Zara up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. "You're free," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "You're really free." "I'm free," Zara repeated, wonder in her voice. Then she looked up at him, her honey-colored eyes full of love. "So what are you going to do about it, Cowboy?" Zachary grinned. "Well, I seem to recall mentioning something about courting you properly, but first, there's something I need to ask you." Right there on the steps of the courthouse, in the middle of Denver with people passing by and giving them curious looks, Zachary dropped to one knee. He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band he'd commissioned from a jeweler in town weeks ago, betting on this moment. "Zara Evans, you came into my life on the worst night of winter and brought spring with you. You've made my cabin a home, my days brighter, and my heart fuller than I ever thought possible. I love you more than I can put into words. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Zara's face, but she was smiling wider than he'd ever seen. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that drew applause from the small crowd that had gathered. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Zachary noticed Judge Patterson standing nearby, watching with approval. "When were you thinking of having this wedding?" The judge called out. Zachary looked at Zara, who looked back at him, and they both knew the answer. "How about today?" Zachary suggested. "If you're willing to perform the ceremony, Judge, and if that's all right with you, Zara." "More than all right," Zara said. "I don't want to wait another day to be your wife." Judge Patterson chuckled. "Well, I suppose I could make time." "Let's do this proper, though. Give me an hour to clear my schedule and gather some witnesses. Meet me at the church on 4th Street. 1 hour later, Zachary and Zara stood before Judge Patterson in a small church, with a handful of strangers serving as witnesses. It wasn't the grand wedding either of them might have imagined as children, but it was perfect in its simplicity and sincerity. Zachary spoke his vows with his whole heart, promising to love and cherish Zara, to protect and provide for her, to be faithful and true all the days of his life. Zara's voice shook with emotion as she made the same promises to him. When Judge Patterson pronounced them man and wife, Zachary kissed his bride with a tenderness that made even the strangers in attendance sigh with appreciation. They spent their wedding night at a hotel in Denver, a small luxury but one Zachary wanted to give Zara. He wanted their first night as husband and wife to be special, memorable. In the privacy of their room, with the curtains drawn and lamplight casting a soft glow, Zachary was struck by the enormity of what they'd done, what they'd found in each other. "Are you happy?" he asked Zara as they stood together, his hands gentle on her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zara replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find this was all a dream." "It's real," Zachary assured her. "I'm real. This is real. You're my wife now, Zara Ellsworth." "Zara Ellsworth," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I like that very much." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people learning each other, loving each other without fear or reservation. Zachary was careful with Zara, mindful of her past hurts, but she met him with an eagerness that spoke of trust and desire. By the time dawn broke over Denver, they'd truly become one in every sense of the word. They stayed in Denver for a few more days, enjoying the honeymoon period. Zachary bought Zara a new dress, a beautiful green one that brought out the gold in her eyes. They ate at restaurants and walked through the city hand in hand, reveling in the simple joy of being together. But eventually, they both grew eager to return home. The cabin in the mountains was calling to them, promising privacy and peace. The journey back to Moab took them through Colorado and into Utah, the landscape changing from mountains to high desert. Zara had never seen this part of the country before, and Zachary loved showing it to her, pointing out landmarks and telling stories. When the cabin finally came into view, Zachary reined in the mules and turned to Zara. "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Ellsworth?" "I've been ready since the moment you woke me up in that wagon and offered me a blanket and kindness," Zara replied. "I just didn't know it yet." They settled into married life with surprising ease. The rhythms they'd established during their courtship continued, but now there was an added intimacy, a freedom to touch and hold and love without restraint. Zachary continued his supply runs, but now he took Zara with him more often than not. She loved seeing new places, meeting new people. Together, they became known along the route between Moab and Denver, the cowboy trader and his quick-witted wife. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter again. On the anniversary of the night Zachary found Zara, they stood together in the spot where his wagon had been, now marked by a small cairn of stones Zara had built. "A year ago, I was sure I was going to die," Zara said softly, her hand in Zachary's. "I was cold and scared and alone. And then you found me." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Finding you, loving you. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stopped somewhere else that night, if I'd crawled into a different wagon?" "No," Zachary said firmly. "Because I believe some things are meant to be. You were meant to find my wagon. I was meant to find you. Everything else is just details." Zara tilted her face up for a kiss. "I love you, Zachary Ellsworth." "I love you too, Zara. Forever." In the spring of 1880, Zara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little fear. They were miles from the nearest doctor, and childbirth was always dangerous, especially out on the frontier. but Zachary was determined to give Zara every advantage. He arranged for a midwife from Bedrock to stay with them as Zara's time drew near. He stocked up on supplies, prepared everything he could think of. On a warm day in August, after a labor that lasted from dawn until dusk, Zara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Zachary held his son for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, staring down at the tiny face. "Zara, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Zara asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Zachary thought of his father, the man who'd taught him everything about being honorable and true. "Thomas. Thomas James Ellsworth, if that's all right with you." "Thomas," Zara repeated, reaching out to touch their son's tiny hand. "It's perfect. He's perfect. We're perfect." Watching Zara with their son, Zachary was struck by how far they'd both come. From that terrible night in the snow to this moment of pure joy, they'd built something real and lasting. Thomas proved to be an easy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. He had his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. Zachary had never known love could expand like this, that his heart could hold this much. 2 years later, Zara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Me. She was tiny and fierce from the start, with lungs that could wake the dead and a will to match her mother's. Zachary was utterly smitten. The cabin that had once housed just Zachary's bachelor existence now rang with the sounds of family. Children's laughter, Zara's singing, the organized chaos of daily life. Zachary expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen for Zara. As the children grew, Zachary and Zara made sure to tell them the story of how their parents met. Not the full details, not when they were young, but the essential truth of it. "Your mama needed help and I was able to give it," Zachary would say. "And then we fell in love. Papa found me in a snowstorm," Zara would add, "and he was so kind. He gave me blankets to keep warm and food to eat. He saved my life." "And then what?" Thomas would always ask, even though he knew the story by heart. "And then I asked your mama to marry me," Zachary would finish. "And she said yes, which was the smartest decision she ever made." That always earned him a swat from Zara, but she was smiling when she did it. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, learning the supply trade from his father. Sarah surprised them all by developing a talent for numbers and business, keeping the account books better than Zachary ever had. In 1892, when Zachary was 46 and Zara was 41, they celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. The children were old enough to leave with neighbors for a night, and Zachary took Zara on a trip to Denver, retracing the journey they'd made as newlyweds. They stood on the steps of the courthouse where Zachary had proposed, older now but no less in love. 14 years, Zara mused. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like I've loved you my whole life." "Best 14 years of my life," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Here's to 40 more." "At least 40, Zara agreed, kissing him soundly. They visited the church where they'd been married, pleased to see it was still standing. They ate at fancy restaurants and walked through the city, reminiscing about that first visit. On their last night in Denver, as they lay in bed in the same hotel where they'd spent their wedding night, Zara grew thoughtful. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. "If Robert had been a better man, if I'd never run away, if you hadn't stopped your wagon in that exact spot." "Sometimes," Zachary admitted. "But I can't regret any of it because it all led to this, to us, to Thomas and Sarah, to the life we've built." "I don't regret it either," Zara said. "Even the hard parts, the scary parts, they were worth it to get here, to be with you." Zachary kissed her forehead. You're the bravest person I know, you know that. You survived things that would have broken most people. You built a new life from nothing. You're amazing." "I had help," Zara said softly. "I had you." The trip back to Utah was leisurely. They were in no rush to get home, content to enjoy this time together. But when the cabin finally came into view, they both felt the pull of it. This was home. This was where they belonged. Thomas and Sarah came running when they arrived, full of stories about their time with the neighbors. The cabin was warm and welcoming, exactly as they'd left it. That night, with the children asleep and the fire crackling, Zachary and Zara sat together on the porch, watching the stars. "Thank you," Zara said out of nowhere. "For what? For that night, for finding me, for not leaving me to freeze, for offering me a blanket and warmth and kindness, for offering me forever." Zachary pulled her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Thank you for saying yes. For trusting me, for loving me. Always," Zara promised. "Forever and always." As the years continued to pass, Zachary and Zara watched their children grow into adults. Thomas married a sweet girl from Moab named Catherine, and they gave Zachary and Zara 3 grandchildren. Sarah, ever independent, started her own freight business, becoming one of the few female business owners in the territory. In 1896, Utah became a state, and the Ellsworth family celebrated along with everyone else. The wild frontier they'd known was changing, becoming more settled and civilized. But some things remained the same. The land was still harsh and beautiful. The winters still brought snow. And Zachary and Zara were still deeply in love. On a cold January night in 1898, exactly 20 years after the night they'd met, Zachary and Zara bundled up and walked to the spot where it had all begun. The cairn of stones Zara had built was still there, though larger now. Every year on this date, they each added a stone. 20 years, Zachary said, adding his stone to the pile. "Can you believe it?" "Barely," Zara admitted, adding her own stone. "Sometimes I still dream about that night, about being so cold I couldn't feel my fingers or toes, about thinking I was going to die. And then I wake up next to you, warm and safe, and I remember how incredibly lucky I am." "I'm the lucky one," Zachary insisted. "You could have ended up in anyone's wagon that night, but you ended up in mine." "Fate," Zara said simply. "It had to be you." They stood there for a while, 2 figures in the snow, holding each other as the wind howled around them. It wasn't as fierce as that night 20 years ago, but it was cold enough to remind them. "Ready to head back?" Zachary asked eventually. "Yes," Zara said. "Home to our warm cabin and our good life. The life you gave me when you offered me that blanket and forever." "The life we built together," Zachary corrected. Hand in hand, they walked back to the cabin, leaving 2 sets of footprints in the fresh snow. Inside, warmth and light awaited them, along with the simple comforts of a life well lived. The children and grandchildren came to visit more frequently as Zachary and Zara aged. The cabin was often full of noise and laughter, multiple generations gathering around the table Zachary had built with his own hands all those years ago. In 1905, Zachary and Zara celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with a party that drew people from miles around. They'd become something of a legend in the area, the cowboy who'd found his wife in a snowstorm and loved her faithfully ever since. At the party, their grandson Timothy, Thomas's oldest boy, asked his grandfather to tell the story again. Zachary looked at Zara, who nodded with a smile. "Well," Zachary began, his voice still strong despite his 60 years. "It was the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. January of 1878. I was on my way back from Denver when I heard something in my wagon. I thought maybe it was an animal at first, a raccoon or something. But when I looked, I found the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, half frozen and barely conscious. "What did you do, Grandpa?" Timothy asked, even though he'd heard this story a dozen times. "I woke her gently. I gave her blankets to warm her up. I built a fire and made sure she was safe. And then, when I looked into those honey-colored eyes, I knew my life had just changed forever." "He saved my life," Zara added, her voice soft with remembered emotion. "He could have turned me away, but he didn't. He took care of me, helped me when I needed it most. And then he loved me. He's been loving me ever since. And I'll keep loving you until my last breath," Zachary said, taking her hand and kissing it gently. "And probably beyond that too." The assembled crowd sighed with appreciation, and Timothy beamed at his grandparents. It was a good story, made better by the fact that it was completely true. As the party wound down and the guests departed, Zachary and Zara found themselves alone on the porch again, their favorite spot for quiet conversation. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Zara asked. "The best," Zachary confirmed. "We've faced challenges, sure, but we've faced them together. That's made all the difference. You remember what you said to me that first morning, when we were walking to the cabin and I could barely stand? I said a lot of things that morning. You said we'd take it slow, that there was no rush. You were so patient with me, Zach, even when you must have wondered if I'd ever truly heal from what I'd been through." Zachary thought back to those early days, the careful way they'd built trust between them. "You were worth the patience. Worth the wait, worth everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the Utah landscape they both loved. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, painting the world in fire. "I want you to know something," Zara said eventually. "If I had to do it all over again, if I had to go through everything I went through just to end up here with you, I would, in a heartbeat." Zachary felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That's quite a statement, considering what you went through. I mean it, every word. Because you showed me what love really is, what it's supposed to be. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me forever." "We gave each other forever," Zachary said. "That night in the snow, we were both lost in our own ways. You found my wagon, but in a sense we found each other. We saved each other." As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, Zachary and Zara went inside, closing the door on another beautiful day. The fire was warm, the cabin was cozy, and they had each other. What more could anyone ask for? Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost old friends and gained new grandchildren. The world around them changed rapidly as the new century brought automobiles and electricity and other modern marvels. But the core of their life together remained constant. In 1912, on a spring morning full of promise, Zachary woke to find Zara already up, standing at the window and looking out at the garden she'd planted every year since they'd married. "Come back to bed," he said sleepily. "It's too early to be up." Zara turned and smiled at him, the morning light catching in her hair, which was now more silver than dark. She was 67 years old, and to Zachary, she'd never been more beautiful. "I was just thinking," she said, coming back to sit on the edge of the bed. "Do you realize we've been together for 34 years, more than half our lives?" "Best 34 years imaginable," Zachary said, sitting up and taking her hand. "Here's to 34 more," Zara laughed. "We'd both be over 100, though with you I wouldn't rule it out." "You're too stubborn to die." "Only because I can't bear the thought of leaving you," Zachary said seriously. "You're my whole world, Zara, you always have been." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "And you're mine, my protector, my partner, my love." They spent the day working together in the garden, planting vegetables and flowers. Their movements were slower than they'd once been. Their backs not quite as strong, but they worked well together, anticipating each other's needs without words. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching another sunset, Zachary felt a deep sense of contentment wash over him. This was what life was supposed to be. Simple moments shared with the person you loved most. "Do you remember what you said you wanted, that night I found you?" Zachary asked suddenly. Zara thought for a moment. "I don't think I knew what I wanted back then, except to not be cold and scared anymore." "Well, you got that. You got warm and safe. But you got so much more too. You got strength and independence. You got children and grandchildren. You got a business and a community. You got everything you deserved." "I got you," Zara said simply. "That was the most important thing. Everything else came from that." As the years advanced further, both Zachary and Zara's health began to fail in small ways. Zachary's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making it hard to handle the reins for long periods. Zara's eyesight dimmed, though she stubbornly continued to read and sew. But they adapted, as they'd always done, supporting each other through every challenge. Thomas took over more of the freight business, eventually taking it over completely. Sarah expanded her operations, becoming quite successful. Both children made sure their parents wanted for nothing, though Zachary and Zara were proud and independent to the end. In the summer of 1918, as the world was caught up in a terrible war overseas, Zachary and Zara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The whole family gathered, children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren now. The cabin couldn't hold everyone, so they set up tables outside, a massive celebration of family and love. At the end of the night, when the younger generation had finally worn themselves out and were sleeping in various corners of the cabin and yard, Zachary and Zara found themselves alone on the porch once more. 40 years, Zachary said wonderingly. 40 years since I married you in that little church in Denver. 42 since you found me, Zara corrected. The real anniversary is in January. True enough. 42 years ago, I heard breathing in my wagon and found a half-frozen woman. Little did I know I'd just found my entire future. Zara leaned her head on his shoulder. We've been so blessed, Zach, so incredibly blessed. We have, he agreed. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if you hadn't climbed into my wagon that night. Lonely, I think. Empty. I didn't even know how much I needed someone until you were there. I think we needed each other, Zara said. I needed saving, obviously, but you needed someone to save. You needed someone to share this life with. We filled gaps in each other we didn't even know existed. They sat together as the stars came out, old and weathered but still deeply in love. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, and neither one wanted to let go. The winter of 1919 was harsh, bringing sickness with it. The influenza that had been ravaging the country finally reached their small corner of Utah. Zachary caught it first, and despite Zara's devoted nursing and the doctor's best efforts, he grew weaker. On a January night, with snow falling softly outside just like that night 41 years ago, Zachary lay in their bed with Zara beside him. His breathing was labored, his skin pale, but his mind was clear. "Don't you dare give up," Zara said fiercely, gripping his hand. "We've fought through too much for you to give up now." Zachary smiled weakly. "Not giving up, love, just tired." "Then rest, get better, we have more life to live together." "Zara," Zachary said softly, "if something happens to me—" "Nothing is going to happen," Zara interrupted, but her voice cracked. "If something does," Zachary continued gently, "I need you to know that these 41 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me happier than I ever deserved to be. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be a better man. I love you more than words can say." Tears were streaming down Zara's face. I love you too, so much. You saved my life, Zach. In every way a person can be saved. You showed me what love really means. You saved mine too, Zachary whispered. The moment I saw you in that wagon, something in me just knew, this is her, this is the one, and I've never doubted it for a single second since. They held each other through the night, Zara refusing to leave his side even when the children urged her to rest. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Zachary took a last deep breath and let it out slowly. I love you, he whispered. Forever. Forever, Zara echoed, holding him close. And then he was gone. The grief nearly broke Zara. For 41 years, Zachary had been her anchor, her safe harbor. Without him, she felt adrift in a way she hadn't since that terrible night in the snow. But she was stronger than she'd been at 25. Zachary had helped her build that strength, and she had children and grandchildren who loved her and needed her. So she grieved, deeply and honestly, but she also lived. Zara stayed in the cabin they'd shared, refusing Thomas and Sarah's offers to come live with them. This was her home, filled with memories of Zachary. She couldn't leave it. Every January, on the anniversary of the night they'd met, Zara would bundle up and walk to the cairn of stones. She'd add 2 stones now, one for her and one for Zachary, and she'd talk to him, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the changing world, about how much she missed him. I'll see you again, she'd always say at the end. When my time comes, I'll find you just like I found your wagon all those years ago, and we'll be together again. Zara lived for 6 more years after Zachary's passing. She saw new babies born and old friends pass away. She adapted to a world that was becoming increasingly modern and foreign. But she never stopped missing Zachary, never stopped loving him. On a cold January night in 1925, during another snowstorm, Zara passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 80 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The family found her in the morning, a peaceful smile on her face, her hand outstretched as if reaching for someone. Thomas and Sarah buried her next to Zachary, in a plot overlooking the land they'd both loved. The headstone read, Zara Ellsworth, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. Found in a snowstorm, loved for a lifetime. And next to it, Zachary's stone said, Zachary Ellsworth, devoted husband, father, and grandfather. He offered a blanket and forever. The family maintained the cabin for years, eventually turning it into a small museum that told the story of Zachary and Zara. Visitors would come to hear the tale of the cowboy who found a woman in his wagon during a blizzard and fell so completely in love that it lasted beyond death. The cairn of stones they'd built together still stands, much larger now as descendants continue to add to it each year. It's become a tradition, a way of honoring a love story that started in the worst of circumstances and bloomed into something beautiful and eternal. People say that sometimes, on snowy January nights, you can see 2 figures standing by the cairn, holding hands and looking at the stars. The cowboy and his wife, together again at last, proof that true love never really dies. It just waits, patient and faithful, for the day when forever can begin again. The story of Zachary and Zara Ellsworth became part of local legend, passed down through generations. Their descendants, numerous and proud of their heritage, made sure the tale was never forgotten. Schools invited elderly Ellsworth relatives to share the story with students. Writers and historians documented it. And always, the message remained the same. Love can be found in the most unexpected places. Kindness matters. And sometimes, offering help to a stranger in need can change your entire life. The cabin that had housed so much love and life eventually fell into disrepair as the decades passed. But in 1958, A group of Ellsworth descendants pooled their resources to restore it. They wanted to preserve not just the building, but the memory of what it represented. Inside, they created a careful recreation of how the cabin would have looked during Zachary and Zara's time. The table where they'd shared countless meals. The fireplace where they'd spent winter evenings. The bed where they'd loved and laughed, and eventually where Zachary had died in Zara's arms. They included displays about the freight business Zachary had run, about Zara's work in the community, about their children, and the legacy they'd left. But most importantly, they made sure visitors understood the heart of the story. A placard near the entrance read, "This is a story about second chances, about how one act of compassion can ripple outward in ways we can never imagine." Zachary Ellsworth found a stranger in his wagon and chose kindness. That choice led to a love that sustained both of them through 4 decades of life on the frontier. It led to children and grandchildren and generations of family. It proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to help rather than turn away. Every year on their wedding anniversary in June, the family held a reunion at the cabin. Ellsworths would come from all over the country, some from overseas, to gather together and celebrate the love that had started it all. They'd share meals, tell stories, add stones to the cairn, and remember. The eldest members of each generation were tasked with keeping the full story alive, making sure the details didn't get lost or romanticized beyond recognition. Yes, it was a beautiful love story, but it had also been real life, real struggle, real pain that Zara had overcome, real courage from both of them in choosing to build a life together. In 1978, on the 100th anniversary of the night Zachary found Zara, over 300 Ellsworth descendants gathered at the cabin. They came from every state and several countries. Lawyers and teachers, doctors and artists, ranchers and business people. All of them connected by the decision 2 people had made a century ago to choose love. The oldest living descendant, Thomas's daughter Margaret, was 94 years old. She'd known both Zachary and Zara personally, had memories of sitting on her grandmother's lap and listening to stories. They were real people, Margaret told the assembled crowd, her voice still strong despite her age. Not fairy tale characters. Grandpa had a temper sometimes. Grandma could be stubborn as a mule. They argued about silly things like everyone does. But underneath all the ordinary daily life, there was this foundation of absolute love and commitment. They'd made promises to each other, and they kept them. Through sickness and health, poverty and modest prosperity, good times and bad, they kept their promises. She paused, looking around at all the faces, seeing traces of Zachary and Zara in each one. That's the legacy they left us. Not just this cabin or the stories, but the example of how to love someone well, how to choose kindness, how to build something lasting. As the sun set that evening, 300 people stood around the cairn of stones. Each person added a stone, so many that they had to start a second cairn nearby. And as the stars came out over Utah, they sang old hymns that Zachary and Zara would have known, their voices carrying across the land. The years continued to pass, as they always do. The world changed in ways Zachary and Zara never could have imagined. Technology advanced. Society evolved. But the cabin remained a touchstone to a simpler time and a timeless truth. In the early 2000s, a writer named Jennifer Ellsworth Thorne, a great-great-great-granddaughter of Zachary and Zara, published a book about their love story. It became a regional bestseller, introducing their tale to a new generation. Movie producers came calling, wanting to turn it into a film. The family debated long and hard about whether to allow it. Would a movie cheapen the story? Would Hollywood get it wrong, turn it into something it wasn't? Finally, they agreed, but only with strict conditions. The story had to be told truthfully. Zara's first husband's abuse had to be acknowledged, not glossed over. The reality of frontier life had to be shown. And most importantly, the core of the story, the quiet, steady love between two people, had to be the focus. The movie, when it was finally made in 2007, was a modest success. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it touched hearts. People wrote to the Ellsworth family, sharing their own stories of unexpected love, of second chances, of choosing kindness. One letter from a woman in Texas particularly moved the family. "I was in an abusive marriage like Zara. I thought I had no way out, that this was just my life now. But watching the movie, seeing how Zara escaped and found real love, it gave me courage. I left. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I did it. And now, 2 years later, I've met someone kind and gentle, someone who treats me the way Zachary treated Zara. Thank you for sharing their story. It changed my life." That letter was framed and hung in the Cabin Museum, a reminder that the legacy of Zachary and Zara's love was still making a difference more than a century later. As the 2010s progressed, the cabin became a popular destination for couples looking for a meaningful place to get married. There was something special about exchanging vows in a place that had housed such a beautiful love story. The family allowed it, honored by the request. Each couple who married at the cabin added stones to the cairn as part of their ceremony, promising to build their love on the same foundation of kindness, commitment, and absolute devotion that Zachary and Zara had demonstrated. The tradition continued, year after year, stones piling higher and higher until the original cairn was enormous, visible from quite a distance. A second, third, and fourth cairn grew alongside it, all testaments to love in its many forms. In 2020, during a global pandemic that kept people isolated and afraid, the Ellsworth family made the decision to digitize everything in the Cabin Museum. They created virtual tours, uploaded documents and photos, and shared Zachary and Zara's story online. Suddenly, people from all over the world could experience the cabin, could learn about the cowboy who'd found a woman in his wagon and loved her forever. Comments poured in from every continent, people finding hope and inspiration in a story from the Old West. "We need stories like this right now," one commenter wrote. "Stories that remind us that kindness matters, that love is worth fighting for, that even in the darkest times there's hope." The Ellsworth family realized that what had started as a private family legacy had become something much larger. Zachary and Zara's story belonged to everyone now, a beacon of light in an often dark world. Today, the cabin still stands, carefully maintained by the Ellsworth family trust. The cairns of stones continue to grow. Couples still marry there, families still visit, and the story is still told. And on snowy January nights, if you listen carefully, some people swear they can hear it. The soft sound of laughter, a man's voice calling his wife's name with infinite tenderness, a woman's response full of love. Zachary and Zara, together still in memory and spirit, proof that true love never dies. It simply transforms, becoming inspiration, becoming legacy, becoming eternal. Their story, which began with such simple kindness on the worst of nights, continues to touch hearts and change lives. A cowboy offered a blanket and forever to a stranger in need. She accepted, and in doing so, they created something that would outlast them both by generations. That's the power of love. That's the power of choosing kindness over indifference, compassion over callousness. That's the legacy of Zachary and Zara Ellsworth. forever preserved in stone and story, in blood and memory, in the hearts of all who hear their tale and believe, if only for a moment, that such love is possible, because it is. It always has been. And as long as people remember Zachary and Zara, it always will be.